Hi there, this is Adam Ballinger, and I've got another short for you. I'm back on track after years and years of putting up posts and then kind of slacking off while I was doing more travel and teaching. I'm on it. So today I have a really nice one. And if you're new to me, most of what I do is I teach yoga and I teach and train yoga teachers. And then even though I've got about 30 years of that and I get into the philosophy stuff, it's some of my favorites. Mindfulness is one of the fortes in there. Part of my background is in exercise science and physiology and kinesiology. Most of my graduate work is in kinesiology, so I'm bringing to you a little bit of that background and then some of the stuff that's kind of become more popular over the last, I'd say about a decade or so. A little bit of this goes even farther back. One of the exercises we're going to do today is rooted in the DNS work. And this is focused mostly on, I think it's about the 4 to 5 month old DNS patterning. If you don't know what that is, when you're born and you're beginning to move around and learn how to connect stuff in your body, one of the theories is that there's a lot of connections, and we call these part of our primal patterns, part of our primal movement patterns. And we are kind of born with part of them, and so our early movements are naturally tuned in to turning those on. That's why we don't come out of the womb and jump up into standing, because that's not one of our patterns yet. That's not one of our primal patterns. We got to put these other things together first. So this is a real subtle piece, and I really just love it. I'm going to show you what it looks like, and then I'm going to show you some of my favorite work to prep to get into it as well. So first, I'll just show you what it looks like. Okay, so if you're going to be laying on your belly, and you did that posture like you're that army guy. I don't know how old you guys are out there, but they used to have these little plastic army men, green army men, and one of them was man, this sounds horrible for a yoga teacher. He was a sniper. He would have the leg out to the side, and then he would be holding a pistol. So we're on that leg out to the side, and if you can imagine that an infant or a child had been spending most of their time on their belly, before they're going to start to figure out how to move, to crawl, that leg is going to have to get up there, and then a connection is going to need to be enlivened and developed with the leg through the hip into the core structures and then eventually up into the arms. And part of that core structures is some of the diaphragm and the core inter-core pressure work as well. So I'm going to take the arms out just like this. There are some specifics about the legs and the alignment through the elbow and the back, knee, and stuff like that. For right now, I just want to get you into some of the basic pattern work. And for you adults out there, the reason why we go through this is maybe we've been sitting so long that we've kind of developed a different connection, a different coordination in the body that's moved away from some of these primal patterns. And these primal patterns are really at the root of most of our movement and longevity stuff. So when we get farther away from those, we find that we move less efficient. Sometimes it turns into increased wear and tear, and sometimes injury. So forearms out here, and I'm going to push down through the forearms. And when you do that, you might feel a lift in your head and torso. When your head comes up, I want to take a little chin tuck. If you know what those deep cervical flexors are, I want to get those to release in there, or you want to get those engaged as part of this entire program and part of this whole posture stuff. So I'm going to be doing a little bit of length in there. Okay, so here, press. Now I want this pushing. If you've gone through any of my sessions where we've talked about the rib cage, I want to make that rib cage come in. And there's a direct connection, if we look at our muscle swings and patterns, between these arms, right through the armpits, scapular thoracic region, and then into these slings that go from each armpit to the opposite hip. So I want to wake those up, push, and get the ribs up. The next part is going to include a little bit of the legs beginning to get more active into the floor, but it's going to help me take that lower belly off the ground. If you did this and you were at a deep low back arch, a little extension there in the lumbar region, we want to take part of that out. If you want to think of scoop or tailbone, that's fine. My preference is a little bit more, tuck the sit bones and draw the low belly off the ground. Okay, I'm the biggest fan of that, scoop the tailbone stuff. So right here when I do this, all the way down, beyond that belt line, I've got a lift. Okay, so that's part of what this is going to look like as we start it. It goes farther. Now, what I found in working this is that with a lot of clients and a lot of students, getting the leg out there is just really, really difficult. And then beginning to learn that push and engage in the core, and even being able to breathe into the inner core pressure. So it's not like an inhale, soft belly breath. It's got to be an inhale into some abdominal wall tone that creates an increase in abdominal pressure. Kids, infants do this really, really well in there. Us adults, we've had a lot of time to sit around and let that belly relax. So let's tackle the hip as the first part. Okay, so one of my favorite things on the hips that's come in probably the last decade is just some of the joint articulation work. One of the areas out there that's done a lot of work with this and controlling, and they even call it their CARs, their controlled articular rotations, is just to begin to work those little teeny movements. If you've seen me do some of this stuff before, my blanket term is just working the micro movements. And when I'm doing this, you know, when I'm coming up, I'm working against gravity. So I know that there's got to be some muscle work in there. When I'm going down, I could just be letting gravity do it. I'm getting to like a soft range of motion there. So I'm going to try to turn this on a bit. I'm going to wake up the foot, and I want to push that down at the outer heel and by the pinky toe as well. And I want to begin to push that down, and I want to connect that pushing down all the way up into the hip. I want to match that with a little bit of lumbar lift into neutral. So I'm not looking for a big deep trench back there. I just want to turn that on for a little while. You might begin to feel a little bit of muscle activity in here as well. If you can, try to figure out where and how to push and just move the muscle activity into different areas. Okay? So I want a big imprint on the nervous system and a lot of awareness through here. Once I've really engaged this and I begin to feel some of those different areas of fatigue, and I can identify with those, this is where we get some of that mindfulness into our body engagement. It's not just simply doing pails and rails and cars and stuff like that, or PNF stuff. I want to bring a lot of awareness to this, and part of that is, in theory, really increasing that neural real estate and recognizing this and creating a little bit more command in this. Okay, so I'm going to take that knee and I'm going to lift it up, and sometimes I'm even going to give it just the gentlest amount of resistance. And you'll notice now when I'm lifting it up, I'm doing that rotation all the way through the shin bones as well. So I want to take that up. I want to see that rotation happen in the foot. So right now, my femur, shin, foot, ankle, all that looks like it's on the same plane. I don't have this knee coming up with the foot going out. So keep that really tight. Okay, now going the other way, I want to add a little gravity today. Or I want to add a little resistance on that today. So I'm just going to put my forearm out here and I'm going to push. A lot of times what we're going to see or feel in our own self is that the harder I try to push, the more this turns into a tuck. So I want to differentiate a little bit. I want my core column to be up tall. I want a lot of support here, a little inner ab pressure. And I want the push to come from the hip, but I don't want it to turn into that hip tuck at the moment. So right there, just pushing it out. I want to get a strong sensation of muscle engagement and muscle fatigue here in the outer hip, as well as a bunch of other stuff through here as well. Now as I begin to push out, sometimes you'll feel a little release and a little more movement in through there. It's a lot like PNF work. We're not quite, out of these end ranges and things. Okay, so I can do that a few times. And then I'm going to take it and I'm going to flip it around. So activating a lot of that real estate. Now this looks like my Pails and Rails 90-90. If you know the FRC work. Great stuff, by the way. I wish I had the time to jump in and get into a bunch of those trainings. So at the moment, FRC, thank you for all your work. I hope to get into your stuff a little bit more at some time. And thanks for the folks who've helped me out understanding some of the FRC work as well. Okay, so now I have that leg out to the side. And for me, if I have a client or if it's me just doing my own personal routines, sometimes I'll feel, just with my own body stuff, I'll feel like there's some sticky points where I can't really let the leg open up. I'm feeling some interference in there. So I might go through and add my push and tone. So I'm going to increase that inner core pressure with a pretty neutral spinal column here. And I'm going to push. And sometimes what happens is we're sending those strong neural messages and we're creating an inhibitory response to some of the antagonists. And sometimes this just releases some of those. It's quite nice. Now, if I'm really going to take a long session on my hips, if COVID wasn't going on, let's say I just flew over to China or flew over, down to South America or something like that, and the hips are really jacked up from all that time in the plane and not getting my fair work, then one of the routine pieces I'll do is I'll take this knee and I'm going to push down, activate, and then I'm going to do a little bit more work, and I'm trying to just increase that neural real estate. If I can turn things on, a lot of times I can create that message to turn things more off. So as I push down, activity, I'm going to take that knee and I'm just going to pretend like I'm pushing it forward. So if I had a block right here, I'm going to pretend like I'm pushing down, so I shouldn't move, very isometric, and pushing the knee into the block. So now my combination is going to have a little bit more hip flexor activity into it, and I'm just going to reverse it. Now depending on how sticky, tight my rotations, my articulations at the hip joint are, I may spend quite a bit of time just tuning it in. So I just went to extension. So knee forward is activating part of that hip flexor combination with that hip adductor. And then I'm going to change it a little bit. I'm going to go that hip adductor and extensor. So I'm going to wake up those glutes, maybe even the hamstrings if I can figure out how to engage them. So I'm just going right around that joint structure and activating. And I want to stay in there long enough that I have a strong sensation and then release. Now, I'm going to save you about 2 hours worth of workshop stuff here. If you needed to, it's a really good idea. It really depends on your time and what your resources are to take this and to move it into other positions. Because each one of those other positions, we still have a similar combination of the leg is in an abducted position, so I'm waking up my adduction. I can wake up the flexors or the extensors, but I'm doing them in slightly different joint angles, so I'm working through that neural real estate. And every time I get that activity in those different spots, I have more access to that neuromuscular release and the antagonist positions. Now, the other thing that you can do is just get right into your Pails and Rails 90-90 work here. That would be fantastic, prepping for that DNS stuff that we're doing. We're crossing over between different techniques. If you're a yoga student of mine, you probably haven't heard me talk with all these big terms. Some of the workshop folks out there have. But this is the stuff that I kind of sneak into the class. And for you folks who are not yoga folks, and this isn't regular class work, and you're working with clients, I encourage you to take your time, learn enough about these things that you can slowly build up basically the connections, but build up the skills and techniques and the tools where a person can go in and activate and release, co-activate, turn on those force couples, release, change positions. So when we do get down to our daily routines, we already know a lot about these movements and there's not so much new stuff. It's a much quicker release process. And every time we get that release, not every time, but very often when we create that release, what we get is a new access. So we have access to power, access to stability, and access to movement. Okay, so I just did some of that. That would be some of my favorite stuff to do. A couple of great exercises. Now I'm going to go back to that DNS work. If you're one of my yoga teaching peeps out there and you're thinking, oh my gosh, that guy's yoga classes must really be horrible. He spends all this time talking about that stuff. I don't. If you have been a regular student, then you're probably going, I remember doing part of that. without the big lecture and all those other things. And that's the way we do it. We build up the skills, we build up the access, we build up those connections to that neural real estate, we build up the neural real estate, and then we can start to do the work without so much of this prep and lecture stuff. Okay, so I'm going to go back, legs just a little bit open, take that knee out. For me, right now, compared to just a couple of moments ago, and I didn't even go through my full work stuff, that access to this position is totally different. Okay? There's some different ideas on do I want to go in there raw and start doing this DNS work without prepping the joints, because maybe that tense tone, restricted movement access in there is more common, so I want to work there. And there's some truth to that. But if you do have time to go through a little bit of your own work, I'm going to create a different access point to this DNS pattern, our 4 to 5 month old stuff. And I'd like to be able to do that from maybe both. So on some days, if you have the time, do the prep work. And on some days, if you don't have the time, don't do the prep work, but you might have to modify as well. You can put something underneath your hips and belly. You can change your leg positions as you work towards this. Okay, so I'm going right in here. Hopefully you didn't turn this off yet, because the end has the last part to that DNS pattern. So I'm going to be planting it. Head, heart, and chest, moving up. Now the ribs aren't in yet. So this head, heart, and chest up is the place where I'm going to take my chin in. If I take that chin in, I should sound like, is it Shaggy, the old rapper? Mr. Lover Lover. So if I take that chin in, it might even kind of change your voice. So I'm not going to show you chin in the whole time. I won't be able to talk. And I want to push now and get the ribs in. And you can see right over my shoulders, ribs collapsed, ribs in. Okay, so I got that thoracic region going up. And I'm going to take that low belly region up as well. And I'm going to take that arm, so this is my knee upside, and I'm going to push and reach. Today we're not going over all the shoulder mechanics, but I definitely don't want that shoulder collapsing. If you find yourself there, back up, do the prep work. Okay, so way up. I like to hold this for a few moments and do a few reps on there. And then one of my practice pieces in there, and I find this makes a huge difference. If you haven't done some of the inner core pressure in different postures, then if you can find some of those workshop clips, I don't think that I have a lot out there on YouTube or Instagram or Yoga Vibes. That's a little bit more technical workshop material. But if you can do that with the inner core pressure, you start to amp up a whole different degree of integration in that nervous system. And really the infants or toddlers are activating a lot of that. It may be a little early, you might see a little more soft belly movement, but they are working into that where it's not just a muscle sling or chain or fascial chain that's connecting the exterior. We want that to go through that inner core area. So when you do get that open, it'd be really good first just to create the position. Create that position really good. A lot of rooting in that forearm, a little bit of rooting here in the legs, and a lot of engagement up through the middle. And then, while it's toned, breathe. Breathe into tone. And if you don't know how to do that, your last little hint here today is exhale with pursed lip and create that tone. You're going to create more towards the end of the breath. And then when you go to inhale, you can kind of mimic, like inhale with resistance. So the pursed lips again. In fact, you can find out there in some of the sport trainers that they're doing wind resistance pieces too. So you might be able to find this if you're really deeply into it and just use it through a whole session. Sometimes they'll have a little restricted breathing piece or something with a little fan in there. And so that each time you inhale and exhale, there's a little bit of resistance and your whole breathing system just has to develop more strength and capacity to breathe like that. We can easily just purse our lips to do it and increase a lot of the inner core pressure, the neural tone, and a lot of the system's effect. All right, if you didn't know I was that much of a body dork, then there you go. You've met me now. This is Adam Ballinger. Play around with this work. It's something to learn as our body changes to figure out how to come back and re-engage those things that are naturally us. Because life sure takes us out of that nature. Let's practice getting back into it. All right, this is Adam Ballinger. Be safe.